I'm here today with Kadie Ausherbauer. Kadie is a former student, graduate of our doctoral program at the University of Minnesota's Family Therapy program. So grateful to have you here today to talk about theory, to talk about your journey to becoming an MFT. Um, Kadie is picked specifically because she has an alignment with Bowen Family Systems Theory. And I was always impressed when Kadie was one of our students with how clear she thought about theory and taking everything back to theory. And so I love that. And I know my students hear those kinds of things from me as well. So, Kadie, to start off, tell me a little bit about how you became a family therapist. How did that become an attractive venue for you in your career?
hmm Yeah. So really, I knew in undergrad that I wanted to be in the mental health healing profession. And I took in my undergrad, we had a sexuality class that used David Snarch's book, The Crucible, as one of our texts. And so that was my first introduction to thinking about problem in a relational lens. And that pretty much hooked me. I also was lucky to meet students during my time in undergrad, and that also helped me. But I worked for a few years in between undergrad and graduate school working with children and in mental health care. And that really solidified my conviction that I needed to be equipped to deal with families because of how incredibly salient, that's still an understatement, I believe, the family relationships are for individual well-being. So that's why when I applied to graduate schools after a few years doing case management,
Yeah, tell
I
me about
applied to MFT programs.
tell me about how you landed then specifically to Bowen theory. I mean, you were probably introduced, as most of us are in our master's programs, to a host of
Yeah.
foundational and contemporary theories. Why Bowen family systems theory?
Yeah, so, as in probably many theory classes in MFT, Bowen theory was the first one that we covered. And I really liked it and was excited about how clear it was the way that the family is the emotional unit. And that really, really struck me. And I think is still one of the most brilliant things that Bowen introduced to our field. But I wasn't sure that would be my favorite. But as we went through the rest of the semester and all the other theories, I still kept coming back to Bowen theory as being my favorite. So that's how I ended up with it. What I wanted from a theory was a way to organize information about the way that people related to each other in a very systemic way. That's what I wanted the most. I didn't need as much the what to do in the therapy room, although I certainly needed to learn that in my master's program, what you actually do with your clients. But I wanted a very robust way to understand and organize information I was collecting about my clients, and also to understand, just human beings in general, my own life, my experiences and family, so that then I could help my clients with their experiences. So it was important to me that we had a way to integrate the intrapersonal processes as well as the interpersonal processes. And I felt like I could get that from Bowen theory. It is unapologetically systemic. There's no way to do Bowen theory without a systemic lens. And that was really important to me as well.
This may be a bit of a stepping back. You've been a proponent of the people you supervise, your clinical supervisees, just having a theory, right? I mean, I see so many people these days are embracing eclecticism, and so they don't really have a model. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts about having a model and then adding to it, or maybe having a model versus eclecticism or things like that?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is perhaps slightly tongue in cheek or a little controversial, is that I don't really believe that people who say they practice eclecticism, that it truly is theoretical. I believe everybody has a theory of what they believe healthy looks like and what needs to change in people's lives for them to become healthier. And so I think that is a result of an unarticulated theory. So I don't actually mind if someone wants to reject all of the existing theories and articulate their own theory. That's fine by me. But that's a whole lot of work, and we already have quite a few robust theories that come at human experience from various angles. And so it's much easier to work off of an existing theory, maybe integrate theories, maybe use like the organizational foundational principles from one theory and then use interventions from another theory. I think all of that is fine. But I think it is very important for us as mental health practitioners and as people who are trying to influence relationships of others, that we have a really strong way to organize information, because it doesn't always go well in the therapy room. And that can be for a lot of different reasons. It can feel really awful sometimes leaving a therapy room. And if I don't have a theory, then I don't know how to make sense of what happened. Did I make a misstep? Did I miss an opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
Is this just the symptoms of the client, whether it's a family system or an individual, playing out, and it feels really bad to be experiencing that interpersonal symptom? Or did I get tripped up somewhere? Was it my, family of origin stuff or my past history that's reacting here? So why does it feel bad? And our clients who are most vulnerable, who have the most difficulty in relationships with others, so the people who we really need to be best equipped to help, are often the people who we sometimes feel bad while we're interacting with them. And so I believe it is most responsible, especially if you're working with highly vulnerable clients, because their symptoms are severe or their interpersonal relationships are really dysfunctional, that we are equipped to help them. And that means being able to understand why, when a session doesn't feel good, when the interaction goes badly or sideways, that we are able to understand what happened there, or at least have some possibilities in mind that are theory-based, that it could have been because of this, or it could have been because of this. I have ideas about what questions to ask or what to do in session that helps me figure out which one it is.
Yeah, I really like that, Kadie, and to kind of harken back to something that you said earlier, like everyone has a theory, but is it an articulated theory or not? And I like the idea of there are several well thought out theories that are already available. Maybe grab one of those before you start venturing out into your own. Um, I have people who will say things like, and this is not a crazy thing to say. Like, there's so much diversity in the world. Like, each family who comes in is so different. How could any one theory be all encompassing? What is your pushback on that? If I'm assuming you have pushback on that.
Yeah, so this is where I would say I differentiate between models and theories, and why to me it was really important to have a true theory, which to me is an overarching way to understand interpersonal dynamics that's more flexible and comprehensive. A model to me says do this, this, and this, and here's what your specific goals are. And that to me wasn't enough. I do use some models and I do use some evidence-based interventions. That is part of my practice, but I also needed a theory. And I think that is, again, that goes back to the unarticulated theory, that most people have a theory. They might say people from this culture can be healthy and people from this culture can be healthy, and families with, a multi-adult kinship, household, that can be healthy, and a single parent family can be healthy. So what is it that's healthy across all of those? And that is what needs to be well articulated. And so that's why we need theory as something to come back to. It also gives us questions to ask. And I think we need to be aware that the way we are wanting to translate our theory into practice, we should hold that with some cultural humility. and like just idiosyncratic family differences. We need to hold humility in the way that we translate our theory. So we're always checking with our clients and gathering more information and seeing where we might be wrong with our assumptions. But theory gives you a place to start from, to ask questions and to figure out where, I need to be a little more flexible in what I understand fusion to be, because this particular relationship actually looks kind of healthy, even though it has some features that from my cultural context look to be fused, for example.
Yeah, great. So tell me a little bit about a particular intervention that you might use with clients, specifically like relational clients, if you will, from Bowen theory. Name the intervention, tell us what it's like, how do you roll it out, what's the language you use, and how does it land on, give us an example of how it's landed on a client and what's been the impact of it or the effect.
Yeah, well, it's such a great question. And I think Bowen theory is a little bit different than most of our MFT theories in that it's not as intervention heavy as some of our others. And Bowen was open about that the intervention, focusing too much on interventions, he felt like then people were missing the point of really understanding the theory. And so I am going to say a little bit more like Bowen theory and how I translate it, and then that will make sense about the interventions that I use. So to me, differentiation of self is about an individual having capacity for authentic intimacy. And that happens when, Bowen talks about the flow of anxiety, the way anxiety moves through the family unit, the emotional system. And then he articulates all these different ways that are dysfunctional patterns of the flow of anxiety. So I have practiced that way, and thought about explaining to people this is triangulation, drawing out a genogram, here's sometimes even using like this gets passed through the generations. See how this happens? And that I have had clients who really benefited from that. But over time, practicing from a Bowen theoretical orientation, I've really come to a more like the simplified, I would say, version of the principles, which is we need to be aware of the way that emotional energy. And so when I say that, it's a kind of neutral term, and it's more about like physiological reactivity than what we usually mean with emotions, which is words like sad, happy, all of that. But watching how the emotional energy flows through a family system, including within an individual, how it's regulated within an individual, and then how that flows through a family system. And that really it can flow all kinds of different ways. The problem is when it's stuck. So I've come to more of an emphasis on flexibility, that people have flexibility and choice with how they regulate emotional energy. And that's actually a much stronger indicator of health than being like, oh, this is cut off, so now we need to like effortfully move toward, reconciliation. That might be a result, but getting to that, like, how can we introduce more flexibility in the way that emotional energy or emotional reactivity is regulated? That gives the person so many more choices. And that allows a person then to act in line with their values, which is one of the most operationalized ways that I see basic self is a person's value system and their ability to act on it, regardless of the situation or who they're with. They're able to act in line with their values and with integrity. So that is my preface, is that my goal is increasing people's flexibility, particularly in places where the flow of anxiety through the system has become particularly rigid or stuck. So sometimes I recommend someone, reach out more to a spouse, for example, for comfort, and ask for help more. Other times I encourage, let's try a different way of dealing with that distress than seeking this person. I really like, and this fits with my lens of its increasing flexibility, is the idea of alternate response options.
Hmm.
So we can map out and really try to understand the landscape of the way that this emotional energy flows through a family. And in the places where it's particularly stuck or rigid, then trying something different, doing a different thing can help.
Hmm.
Um, I've done, very lovely, I mean, of course, I think so. Lovely, clearly Bowen, like look at the genogram here and see how this pattern was, you experienced this with your father. Now you're doing this with your significant other. I've done those, and that's wonderful. But I've also found sometimes it is just even a small, like these patterns come out in microsocial exchanges. So sometimes a very small change can make the difference. And sometimes the intervention itself sounds like another theory because it uses language or an intervention from another model. So sometimes it sounds like solution focus, where I ask a miracle question or a scaling question. And sometimes it sounds like narrative. I had one couple who their level of distress dramatically increased after one session because I said this conflict they were having, it was a very stuck um, way of emotional energy flowing through their couple. And it was all related to one argument, the content of one argument. And all I said was, well, you've had this story about your relationship for a long time. If you want things to be different, what I'm asking you now is just to open the door a crack for a different story to come into play and we can work on building it. Well, they like built it already. Like once they came back the next week and they're like, oh my gosh, that is an old story. That's an old fight we were having. We want something different. And it was that quick. So, and it sounds narrative. I was like, that
Yeah, it
sounds
totally
narrative,
sounds
not
totally
solution.
sounds narrative. But how does it fit within your framework then?
Yeah. So it sometimes it's the way someone thinks about a situation that enables them to behave differently. Sometimes you can behave differently and that changes the way that the emotional energy is flowing. Sometimes it can be just slowing it down. So I remember father and son I worked with, and I would just have them slow down and notice themselves and the other person. So I would say, like, they would be going along fine. And then it would hit a point and the son would start going like this, like leaning away, and really protecting himself. And so I was like, look what happened here. This person moved this way, Dad, did you notice that happening? What do you think that's about? It just like slowed that process down. So then the two people were able to make choices about how they were engaging with each other and exchanging this emotional energy.
And you're mapping that out, like you're mapping out what you see in session, right? It's almost an
Mhm.
experiential kind of a thing too, like
Mhm.
I'm seeing this thing happen. Are you aware of this? But
Yeah.
you're conceptualizing it as this is emotional energy that's taking place. This is emotional energy that's influencing this. And I want to free up their
Yeah.
ability to have more choices in how they interact with each other.
Mhm.
Right? That's a
Mhm.
that's a big thing. One of the criticisms of Bowen theory is it tends to prize or value intellect over emotionality. And
Mhm.
even Bowen and Kerr say really the crux of this model is to give people choice in
Yes.
how they respond.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm
One
not
of
just responding from my knee-jerk kind of
Mhm.
instinctive places.
Yes. Yes. And so I wanted that for myself too in my own life. I wanted a theory that made sense for me and I could practice myself.
Yeah.
And so one of my clearest examples of like alternate response options was this was during a time when I was learning Bowen theory. I was, back home in a interaction with a family member. And I had some awareness that the conversation, I was finding it unpleasant. And then I noticed that somehow I had moved from like the center of the room into a corner of the room with my back in the corner. And I was like, I just backed into a corner here. It was a reaction. This is an emotional reaction
Yeah.
that my body system was acting as if I was under threat. I wasn't actually. And so just that awareness and saying, I have a choice here. And so then I could just be like, there's a door. I'm just going to move toward the door. And I did and could end the conversation. And it all was fine because I wasn't actually under threat. But in the emotional system where it all becomes so tightly encoded, and so it's really difficult for us to have awareness about, that is where, I was like, just try something different. And it can totally change then the way that the emotional energy flows. The other thing that Bowen theory is big on is that people don't intend to be dysfunctional with each other, particularly in family relationships. The majority of people want to be loving and meaningful relationships with each other. And so these things are automatic. And that's to me what the thinking versus feeling is about, is being awake and aware and noticing yourself in this, participating in this flow of emotional energy in the family system. Because then, like you were saying, you get to make a choice and you can act in line with your values instead of this reactivity.
Yeah. I love it. Kadie, I appreciate you being with us today and just sharing some of your thoughts about theory and how it informs your work. Um, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but you're a professor at St. Olafs University in Northfield, Minnesota, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And where you teach psychology classes. Kadie Ausherbauer, so glad to have you on today and have you share your ideas about Bowen Family Systems Theory. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Steve. This was fun.
All right.